Faz.
Prime Minister, it's now almost 25 years since the Scotland Act established the Scottish Parliament, and I think it'd be fair to say that relationships between the two governments have never been so poor, characterised as they are by mistrust, suspicion and antagonism. What are you personally doing to try and improve the situation?
Well, I think it's important to try and have a constructive relationship with all the devolved governments in the United Kingdom. Clearly, we're not going to agree on everything, but that doesn't mean. I do think it's important, which is why I think when I first had this job, I spoke, I think, on the first day to the, as it was then, First Minister, not just of Scotland, but of Wales. I was also the first Prime Minister, I think, in over a decade to attend the British-Irish Council that brought together the leaders from across the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. That was warmly received. I met with First Ministers in my role and have done with the new First Minister, and continue to try and find ways to work collaboratively together, for Freeport's being a good example of that, whilst acknowledging it's clearly not that we're going to agree on everything, but it's good to have the dialogue.
Well, that's a very lengthy and important list, but isn't it the case that we now have a situation where the UK routinely ignores Scottish Parliament legislative consent motions? The UK can now legislate in devolved areas. You know, the nuclear option of a Section 35 being used for the first time. The Scottish Government ministers are even being reprimanded for saying Brexit is bad for Scotland when meeting foreign delegations. Do you think this muscular unionism is actually working for you?
No, as I said, I think there are examples of the Scottish Government and UK Government working together, particularly to deliver things like free ports. But you mentioned the Section 35. I think we've had that debate in the past. It was clear that there were concerns about the operation of that law on UK-wide competencies and areas of competence, and it was reasonable in that sense for the Scottish Secretary of State, after taking significant legal advice, to issue the Section 35. And you say, I know that, yes, the first time it's been used, but it was always envisaged. It was always envisaged that it might be used, including, I think, by the SNP at the time. So I don't think people can debate the principle of being used, because it's something that was supported at the time. And again, obviously, it's subject to a legal proceeding now, so there's a limit to how much we can say.
The Scottish Government, but with respect, the Welsh Labour Government recently criticised the UK Government's unilateral and destructive approach to devolution, and is actually seeking to have the UK judicially reviewed. The Northern Irish executive isn't sitting in Scotland. Wales feels that their democracy is under real threat. Is devolution broken?
Well, again, on Wales, I spoke to the First Minister. I think the first day I got this job, I spent time, I met with him, again, delivering free ports, which are a good example of Wales and Scotland, Wales and the UK government working together. And with regard to Northern Ireland, because you brought it up, I think anyone can say that I haven't been heavily, actively involved in trying to restore the executive in Northern Ireland. I think I visited Northern Ireland almost 5 or 6 times in my first few months in this job. I think I should demonstrate my commitment to Northern Ireland, the people of Northern Ireland, and the Windsor Framework represents, I think, a very significant intervention that removed one of the big barriers to the executive being restored in Northern Ireland.
Given that the UK government's given itself the provisions of the Single Market Act against strong opposition from Scotland and Wales, isn't it the main problem that the UK government represents English interests, while at the same time being the arbiter and referee for the whole of the United Kingdom? And you've now given yourself the powers of the European Union. Surely the four nations idea across the UK just isn't working anymore.
No, I think actually, look, the Scottish government, as far as I can recall when I last looked at this, was probably the most powerful devolved assembly anywhere in the world, if not the, certainly one of. Government also delivered all the recommendations in the after 2016. Those have all been delivered, and I think the UK government is right that it looks after UK-wide interests. Now, as I say, sometimes those will conflict, and we've seen that with the Section 35 on the Gender Recognition Act. There's a court process to resolve that, so we should let that.
Saving Scotland from itself with legislation like
no, I think that's because
like there's DRS. Is it your job now to be the corrective feature when it comes to devolution issues that you don't like?
No, actually, I mean, on DRS, actually, the drinks industry raised concerns about the Scottish government's
your job is to do that on their behalf.
differing on the rest of the plans for the UK. Now, It's because they had an interaction with UK interests that the UK government was requested for the UKIM exclusion, and actually, as I said, there was an exclusion given on narrow terms, and the decision to not proceed was a decision that was made by the Scottish government.
So it was said to be in the English national interest, therefore it will be judged to be in the UK interest. Is that how it works now? I'm trying to understand how we get to where we are with these. If it's 4 nations, surely all 4 nations should be equal in how these issues are approached.
Well, as I said, the operation of the scheme had an impact on UK-wide interests, and that's why UKIM exclusion was sought, granted on a narrow basis, which would allow the scheme to proceed in a particular way. It was a decision, I think, of the Scottish government ultimately not to proceed with it.
Yeah, because you made it possible for them.
That's not right, actually. I think the chief executive of Circularity Scotland was categorical.
It had nothing to do with you.
I think it was categorical that the scheme remain viable on that basis, and many successful schemes run without glass. So it was the Scottish government that decided not to proceed, and that's a decision that they can explain.